The rain-slicked streets of Seattle glistened under the streetlights, and I was kissing a boy for the first time in my life. His lips were warm, tasting faintly of peppermint gum, and my heart was a runaway train. Then I heard the sharp gasp. My Uncle Ray, standing frozen in the doorway of the old bookstore where I'd thought we were alone. I'm Elliot Harper, 24, a barista with dreams bigger than my paycheck, and that boy was Caleb Nguyen, 25, a street artist with a crooked smile that could unravel me. We'd met 3 months ago at a Capitol Hill art walk, where his murals, vivid explosions of color and defiance, had stopped me cold. That night, in the cramped backroom of dog-eared pages, surrounded by stacks of musty novels, we'd been stealing a moment, thinking the world was ours. But Uncle Ray, my only family in this city, had just walked in. His weathered face a map of shock and something else I couldn't name. "Elliot," he said, his voice low, trembling with an edge I'd never heard. "We need to talk. Now." Caleb's hand tightened in mine, but Ray's next words hit like a freight train. "I'm not mad. I've been where you are." My breath caught. Uncle Ray, the gruff ex-cop who'd raised me since I was 12, had a secret of his own? I didn't pull away from Caleb. Not yet. The bookstore smelled of old paper and coffee grounds, a sanctuary where I'd spent countless evenings shelving books to make rent. Caleb and I had been sneaking moments here for weeks, ever since he'd scrawled my phone number on a napkin with a doodle of a star. Tonight, though, the air felt heavier, charged with the weight of Ray's words. He motioned us to the sagging couch in the corner, his broad shoulders hunched like he was carrying a decade's worth of guilt. "Sit," he said, not a command but a plea. Caleb hesitated, his dark eyes flicking to me for reassurance. I nodded, and we sank onto the couch, our knees brushing. Ray paced, his boots scuffing the worn hardwood. "I was your age once," he started, his voice rough as gravel. "Thought I could hide who I was. Thought I had to." He stopped, staring at a faded photo on the wall. A younger Ray, arm around a man I didn't recognize, both of them laughing under a pier. "His name was Marcus," Ray said, and the name landed like a stone in still water. "We were together. In '89. Before you were born, Elliot." My mind reeled. Uncle Ray, the man who'd taught me how to throw a punch and never cry in public, had loved a man? Caleb's fingers laced through mine, grounding me as Ray went on. "We kept it secret. Had to. But it cost us. Cost me." He told us about Marcus, a jazz pianist with a laugh that could light up a room. They'd met at a dive bar in Pioneer Square, back when Seattle was grittier, less polished. They'd stolen moments in alleys and empty warehouses, always looking over their shoulders. "We got careless one night," Ray said, his eyes distant. "Got caught. Marcus paid the price." His voice cracked, and I saw the man who'd raised me break open, raw and human. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ray shook his head, the lines on his face deepening. "Not tonight, kid. Just don't make my mistakes. Don't hide." He looked at Caleb, then back at me. "You've got something real here. Protect it." Caleb and I left the bookstore in silence, the rain still falling in soft sheets. We walked to his tiny studio apartment in Fremont, a cluttered space filled with half-finished canvases and the sharp scent of turpentine. He didn't let go of my hand the whole way. Inside, we sat on his lumpy mattress, the city's hum filtering through the cracked window. "Your uncle," Caleb said, his voice soft. "He's not what I expected." I laughed, a shaky sound. "Yeah, me neither." I'd always seen Ray as unbreakable, a wall of stoicism who'd taken me in after my parents died in a car crash. Now he was a man with scars I'd never seen. Caleb pulled me close, his warmth chasing away the chill. "He's right, you know," he murmured. Us. It's worth protecting." But the world outside wasn't kind to people like us. I'd seen the news, heard the slurs shouted from passing cars. Caleb had his own stories. A mural defaced with hate, a brick through his studio window last year. Yet here we were, two stubborn souls refusing to let go. What if we get caught again? I asked, my voice small. Caleb's lips brushed my forehead. Then we fight. Together. That night, we fell asleep tangled in each other, the city's pulse matching our own. But Ray's story lingered, a warning and a promise. Marcus, a name I didn't know but couldn't forget. What had happened to him? And why did Ray's words feel like a storm was coming? The next morning, I woke to Caleb sketching me, his pencil scratching softly against paper. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the flecks of paint on his knuckles. "You're beautiful when you're asleep," he said, grinning. I rolled my eyes but felt my cheeks heat. We spent the day wandering Pike Place Market, dodging tourists and stealing bites of each other's pastries. For a moment, life felt simple, like love could be enough. But back at my apartment, reality crashed in. Ray was waiting, his pickup truck idling outside. "Get in," he said, his tone urgent. I climbed into the passenger seat, my stomach twisting. "What's wrong?" I asked. He didn't answer, just drove us to a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like regret. "There's something you need to know," he said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "About Marcus, and why I'm telling you this now." His eyes met mine, heavy with a truth I wasn't sure I was ready for. "Someone's been watching you, Elliot. You and Caleb. And I think it's connected to what happened back then." My heart stopped. "Watching us?" I echoed, my voice barely audible over the diner's jukebox. Ray nodded, his jaw tight. "I saw a guy outside the bookstore last night, after you left. Same type who used to tail me and Marcus. I don't know who he is, but I know trouble when I see it." Fear clawed at me, but so did anger. I just found Caleb, just started to believe we could have something real. Now this? "What do we do?" I asked, my hands shaking. Ray leaned forward, his voice steady despite the storm in his eyes. "We don't run. Not this time. But you need to be careful. Both of you." That night I told Caleb everything. We sat on his rooftop, the Seattle skyline sprawling before us, all sharp edges and flickering lights. He listened, his face unreadable, then pulled out a small sketchbook. "This is us," he said, showing me a drawing of two figures under a starlit sky, hands intertwined. "No one gets to take this away." His voice was fierce, and I believed him. But as we held each other, the weight of Ray's warning settled in. Someone was watching. Someone who knew about us, about Ray's past. I thought of Marcus, of the life Ray had lost. I wouldn't let that happen to us. Not to Caleb. Not to me. But the shadows were closing in, and I didn't know how to fight what I couldn't see. The days after Ray's warning felt like walking on a tightrope. Every glance from a stranger, every creak of my apartment floor, sent my pulse racing. Caleb and I tried to keep things normal. Coffee dates at our favorite hole-in-the-wall cafe, late-night talks about his art and my half-written novel. But the air was thick with unease. Seattle, with its gray skies and bustling streets, had always felt like home. Now it felt like a maze, and we were the prey. I started noticing things. A man in a dark coat lingering across from the bookstore, his face hidden by a baseball cap. A car that seemed to follow us too closely on our walk to Fremont. Caleb saw it too, but he brushed it off with a laugh. "You're getting paranoid, Elle," he said, squeezing my hand. But his eyes didn't match his smile. He was scared too. Uncle Ray wasn't helping. He'd gone quiet, retreating into the gruff silence I remembered from my teenage years. When I pressed him for more about Marcus, he'd change the subject or leave the room. But one night, after I closed up the bookstore, he showed up with a shoebox under his arm, his face grim. "You need to see this," he said, setting the box on the counter. Inside were letters, yellowed and creased, tied with a faded red ribbon. Marcus's handwriting was elegant, looping, full of life. "My dearest Ray," one began, "you make the world feel possible." My throat tightened as I read, each word a glimpse into a love that had been stolen. There were photos, too. Ray and Marcus on a beach, arms around each other, the ocean stretching endless behind them. And then, tucked at the bottom, a newspaper clipping from 1989. The headline screamed, "Local musician found dead in alley, hate crime suspected." "Marcus," I whispered, my voice breaking. Ray nodded, his eyes glistening. "They never caught who did it. Cops didn't try hard enough. Said it was a robbery gone wrong. But I knew better." He clenched his fists, the knuckles white. "We'd been followed for weeks. Threats scrawled on my car. Calls in the middle of the night. I thought we could handle it. I was wrong. I felt sick. The parallels were too stark. Someone watching us just like they'd watched Ray and Marcus." "Why now?" I asked. "Why us?" Ray shook his head. "I don't know. But I've seen that guy again, the one from the bookstore. He's not random, Elliot. He's got a purpose." Caleb didn't take the news well. We were at his studio, paint cans scattered around us, when I showed him the clipping. His face went pale, his hands trembling as he read. "This is real," he said, his voice barely audible. "This isn't just some creepy guy. Someone wants to hurt us." I wanted to argue, to tell him we'd be fine, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I pulled him into my arms, holding him as if I could shield him from the world. "We can't just wait for something to happen," Caleb said, pulling back. His eyes were fire now, the fear giving way to defiance. "We need to find out who this guy is." I hesitated. Ray had told us to be careful, not to go looking for trouble. But Caleb was right, sitting still felt like surrender. "Okay," I said, "but we do this smart." We started small, keeping track of the man in the dark coat. Caleb sketched him from memory, his pencil capturing the sharp jaw, the shadowed eyes. I asked around at the bookstore, showing the sketch to regulars, but no one recognized him. Ray, meanwhile, was digging into his old contacts from his cop days, calling in favors to see if anyone knew about a stalker targeting queer couples in Seattle. "Be patient," he told me, but patience wasn't my strong suit. One night we got a lead. A barista at the cafe across from Dog-Eared Pages said she'd seen the man, always sitting at the same corner table, nursing a coffee and watching the bookstore. "He's been there every day this week," she said, her voice low. "Never talks, just watches." My stomach churned, but Caleb's jaw set. "Let's confront him," he said. I grabbed his arm. "No way. That's reckless." But his eyes were blazing. "I'm not letting fear run my life, Elliot. Are you?" The next evening we staked out the cafe. Felt absurd, like we were playing detectives in a bad movie. But Caleb's determination was infectious. We sat in a booth by the window, pretending to read menus, our eyes on the corner table. Sure enough, the man was there, his cap pulled low, a newspaper spread in front of him. He didn't look up, but I felt his attention on us, a cold weight that made my skin crawl. "Let's go," Caleb whispered, standing. I grabbed his wrist, my heart pounding. "Caleb, wait." But he was already moving, weaving through the crowded cafe. I cursed under my breath and followed, my pulse in my throat. Caleb stopped at the man's table, his voice steady but sharp. "Why are you following us?" The man looked up, his face unreadable. He was older than I'd thought, maybe 40, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "You've got the wrong guy," he said, his voice flat, but his eyes flicked to me, and I saw recognition there. He knew who we were. Caleb leaned closer, his voice low. "We know you've been watching. Tell us why, or we call the cops." The man's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Cops won't help you," he said, folding his newspaper and standing. He was taller than us, broad-shouldered, and for a moment, I thought he might lunge. But he just brushed past us, leaving a chill in his wake. Caleb started to follow, but I grabbed him. "Don't," I said. "He's dangerous." Back at my apartment, we argued. Caleb wanted to keep pushing to track the man down, but I was scared. Scared for him, for us, for the ghost of Marcus hanging over us. "We need Ray," I said finally. "He knows how to handle this." Caleb's shoulders slumped, but he nodded. We called Ray, who showed up an hour later, his face grim. "I got something," he said, spreading a map of Seattle on my kitchen table. He'd marked spots where he'd seen the man, places that formed a pattern around Capitol Hill and Fremont, our neighborhoods. "He's not random," Ray said. "He's targeting you, just like they targeted me and Marcus." He hesitated, then pulled out a photo from his wallet. It was Marcus, smiling, but next to him was another man, younger, with the same sharp jaw as our stalker. "This was Marcus's brother, Derek," Ray said. "He blamed me for what happened. Swore he'd make me pay." My blood ran cold. Derek. Was he the man in the dark coat? And if he was, what did he want with us? Revenge? Justice? Something worse? Caleb's hand found mine under the table, his grip fierce. "We're not running," he said, his voice steady. "Not from him. Not from anyone." That night we made a plan. Ray would keep digging, using his old contacts to track Derek down. Caleb and I would stick together, no more solo walks or late-night shifts at the bookstore. But as we lay in bed, the city's lights flickering through the window, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. Derek wasn't just a shadow. He was a threat, a living echo of a tragedy that had broken Ray. And now he was coming for us. The next week was a blur of tension and sleepless nights. Caleb and I moved like ghosts through our routines, hyper-aware of every shadow, every stranger's glance. Ray had confirmed it. The man in the dark coat was Derek Coleman, Marcus's younger brother. He'd been released from prison 6 months ago after serving time for assault, and now he was back in Seattle, his anger a festering wound. Ray didn't know why Derek was targeting us, but he suspected it was tied to his own guilt, a twisted need to punish anyone who dared to love openly the way he and Marcus couldn't. We tried to stay safe. Caleb moved into my apartment, his paint-splattered duffel bag a small rebellion against the fear. We cooked dinners together, laughed over bad reality TV, and held each other when the nightmares came. But the city felt smaller, its corners sharper. I stopped going to the bookstore alone, and Caleb stopped painting his murals at night. We were caging ourselves, and it hurt. One evening, Ray called us to a meeting at his old precinct. He'd pulled strings to get us access to a detective, a woman named Sophia Alvarez who'd worked with him back in the day. We sat in a cramped office, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and ink. Sophia was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, her desk cluttered with case files. "Ray says you've got a stalker," she said, her gaze flicking between me and Caleb. "Tell me everything." We spilled it all, the man in the dark coat, the newspaper clipping, Marcus's death, Ray's suspicions about Derek. Sophia listened, her pen scratching notes. When we finished, she leaned back, her expression grim. "Derek Coleman's a ghost in the system," she said. "No recent address, no job, nothing. But I'll put out feelers. In the meantime, you two need to stay low. No heroics." Caleb's jaw tightened. "We're not hiding forever," he said. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to, but you don't want to end up like Marcus either." Her words hit like a slap, and I felt Caleb's hand tense in mine. Ray stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. He'd heard this before, lived it. That night, we broke the rules. Caleb was restless, his artist's soul itching for creation. "I need to paint," he said, pacing my apartment. Just one mural. One night. I argued, begged him to wait, but his eyes were wild with need. This is who I am, Elliot, he said. I can't let him take that from me. Against my better judgment, I gave in. We slipped out at midnight, heading to an alley in Capitol Hill where Caleb had started a mural weeks ago. A vibrant explosion of stars and hands reaching for each other. The alley was quiet, the air sharp with the bite of autumn. Caleb worked fast, his spray cans hissing as colors bloomed on the brick wall. I kept watch, my heart hammering, scanning the shadows for any sign of Derek. For a moment, it felt like we'd won, like we could reclaim this small piece of ourselves. Then I saw him. He stood at the mouth of the alley, his silhouette unmistakable, tall, broad, the cap pulled low. Caleb, I hissed, grabbing his arm. He froze, paint dripping from the can in his hand. Derek didn't move, just watched, his presence a suffocating weight. Go, I whispered, pulling Caleb toward the other end of the alley. But Derek stepped forward, his voice cutting through the night. You think you're untouchable? He called, his tone laced with venom. You're just like them. You'll pay too. We ran, our footsteps echoing on the pavement, Caleb's paint cans clattering to the ground. We didn't stop until we reached my apartment, locking the door behind us. Caleb was shaking, his face pale, but his eyes burned. He's not stopping, he said, his voice raw. We have to end this. The next morning, Ray showed up with a plan. He'd tracked Derek to a rundown motel on the outskirts of Seattle, a place where cash bought anonymity. We're not confronting him, Ray said, his voice firm, but we're watching, gathering proof. Sophia's got a team ready to move if we can pin him down. I nodded, but Caleb was quieter, his usual fire dimmed. I hated seeing him like this, his spirit chipped away by fear. We spent the day tailing Derek from a distance, Ray's old pickup blending into the city's traffic. Derek moved like a man with a purpose, meeting shady figures in back alleys, slipping into bars and out again. Each stop felt like a puzzle piece, but we didn't know the picture. By evening, we were exhausted, parked outside the motel, watching Derek's room from across the street. That's when it happened. A second car pulled up, and a man stepped out, older, with gray hair and a limp. Ray's breath caught. That's Victor, he said, his voice barely audible. Marcus's old manager. He was there the night Marcus died. My stomach twisted. Victor? Another ghost from Ray's past? What was he doing with Derek? We watched as Victor handed Derek a small package, their heads bent close. Ray's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. This isn't just about you two, he said. This is personal. They're coming for me, too. Caleb's hand found mine, his grip tight. Then we fight for all of us, he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. That night, back at my apartment, we pored over everything we knew. Ray spread out his old case files, pages of notes from Marcus's death. Victor's name appeared again and again, a witness who'd claimed he saw nothing, a man who'd vanished after the investigation fizzled out. He lied, Ray said, his voice bitter. He knew who killed Marcus. Maybe he was part of it. Caleb was sketching again, his pencil flying over the page, drawing Victor and Derek as if committing their faces to memory would protect us. I watched him, my heart aching. He was so brave, so stubborn, and I loved him for it. But love wasn't enough to stop what was coming. We need to talk to Sophia, I said. Get her to bring them in. Ray nodded, but his eyes were haunted. If Victor's involved, this goes deeper than I thought. We're not just dealing with a grudge. This is a vendetta. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. A vendetta that had already taken Marcus and now threatened to take us. As we planned our next move, Caleb pulled me aside. We stood on my tiny balcony, the city sprawling below us, its lights flickering like stars. I'm scared, Elle, he admitted, his voice soft. But I'm not sorry. Not for us. Not for this. He kissed me, slow and deep, and for a moment, the world fell away. It was just us, two hearts beating against the dark. But the dark was still there, waiting. Derek and Victor were out there, plotting, and Ray's past was colliding with our present. We were in too deep to turn back, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that this wasn't over. Not yet. Sophia moved fast. By the next morning, she'd pulled strings to get a surveillance team on Derek and Victor. Ray, Caleb, and I were told to stay put, to let the professionals handle it, but sitting still felt like betrayal. Caleb was restless, sketching furiously, his murals now filled with jagged lines and stormy colors. I tried to write, to lose myself in the novel I'd been chipping away at, but the words wouldn't come. All I could think about was Marcus, Derek, Victor, and the fact that our lives were tangled in a web spun decades ago. Ray was a wreck. He'd always been the strong one, the one who'd pulled me through grief and teenage rebellion, but now he was unraveling. I should have stopped this back then, he said one night, sitting at my kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey untouched in front of him. If I'd fought harder for Marcus, maybe none of this would be happening. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, but the words felt hollow. Caleb, sitting across from him, reached out and touched his hand. You're fighting now, he said. That's what matters. Ray looked at Caleb, then at me, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of the man who'd raised me. You're good kids, he said, his voice thick. Don't let them take what you have. It was as close to a blessing as we'd get, and it meant everything. Sophia called us to the precinct 2 days later. She'd found something, a paper trail linking Victor to a string of unreported incidents in the 80s, assaults on queer men that had been swept under the rug. He was never charged, she said, her voice tight with anger. But he was connected to Marcus's case. Witnesses saw him near the alley that night, but he claimed he was just passing by. She slid a photo across the desk. Victor, younger, standing outside the bar where Marcus had played his last gig. Next to him was a man who looked eerily like Derek, only younger. That's Derek's father, Sophia said. He died a year after Marcus. Overdose. Derek was just a kid then. The pieces were falling into place, but they didn't make the fear go away. Derek wasn't just acting out of grief. He was carrying a legacy of hate, passed down from a father who'd been complicit in Marcus's death. And Victor? He was the thread tying it all together, a man who'd escaped justice for too long. We're building a case, Sophia said, but we need evidence. Something solid to tie them to the stalking or, better yet, to Marcus's murder. Caleb's eyes flashed. Then let's get it, he said. Ray shook his head. No, you're staying out of this. But Caleb was already standing, his jaw set. I'm not hiding while they come for us. We can bait them, draw them out. I grabbed his arm, my heart racing. Caleb, no. This isn't a game. But he looked at me, his eyes steady. I'm doing this for us. For Marcus. For Ray. Against Ray's protests, we came up with a plan. Caleb would finish his mural in the alley, the one Derek had interrupted. It was a risk, but it was public enough to keep us safe, and it might draw Derek out. Sophia agreed to have plainclothes officers nearby, ready to move if Derek or Victor showed. Ray hated it, but he knew Caleb was stubborn, and I wasn't about to let him go alone. The night was cold, the alley lit by a single flickering streetlight. Caleb worked fast, his spray cans hissing as he painted. A figure reaching for a star, its edges bleeding red and gold. I stood watch, my nerves electric, scanning the darkness. Ray was nearby, hidden in a doorway, his old cop instincts sharp. The officers were out there, too, their presence a small comfort. Then I saw him, Derek, stepping out of the shadows, his cap gone, his face pale and twisted with rage. He didn't see the officers, didn't see Ray. His eyes were locked on Caleb, who kept painting, pretending not to notice. "You think you're clever?" Derek called, his voice low and venomous. "You think you can flaunt this in my face?" Caleb turned, his movements slow, deliberate. "This is for Marcus," he said, gesturing to the mural. "For everyone you've hurt." Derek's face contorted, and he took a step forward, a knife glinting in his hand. My heart stopped, but before I could move, Ray was there, tackling Derek to the ground. The officers swarmed, cuffing Derek as he thrashed, screaming about justice and betrayal. But it wasn't over. Victor appeared at the other end of the alley, his limp more pronounced in the dim light. He froze when he saw the officers, then turned to run. Sophia was faster, cutting him off, her gun drawn. "Don't move," she said, her voice like steel. Victor raised his hands, his face a mask of resignation. We spent the rest of the night at the precinct, giving statements, answering questions. Derek and Victor were in custody, but the weight of it all lingered. Ray sat with us, his silence heavy. "You did good," he said finally, his voice rough. "Marcus would have been proud." Caleb squeezed my hand, his eyes red but steady. "We did it for him," he said, "and for us." Sophia came by with an update. They'd found evidence in Derek's motel room, letters, photos, a journal detailing his obsession with Ray, with me and Caleb. It was enough to charge him with stalking, and they were digging into Victor's past, hoping to finally tie him to Marcus's murder. "This won't bring him back," Sophia said, her eyes on Ray. "But it's a start." We left the precinct at dawn, the city waking up around us. Caleb and I walked hand in hand, the fear still there but quieter now. Ray followed, his steps slow but steady. We stopped at the mural, now finished, the figure reaching for the star under a sky of crimson and gold. It was beautiful, a testament to everything we'd fought for. Back at my apartment, Caleb and I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but alive. Ray sat across from us, looking older but lighter, like a burden had been lifted. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft, "for not telling you sooner, for letting my past hurt you." I shook my head. "You saved us, Ray. You always have." Caleb leaned against me, his warmth a reminder of what we'd almost lost. "We're not done," he said, his voice fierce. "We keep living. We keep loving." I kissed him, slow and sure, and for the first time in weeks, I believed we could. But the story wasn't over. Derek and Victor were behind bars, but the scars they'd left, on Ray, on us, would take time to heal. And there was still a question unanswered. Who else had been involved in Marcus's death? The truth was out there, waiting, and I knew we'd face it together. The weeks after the arrests were a strange mix of relief and reckoning. Derek and Victor were charged, Derek with stalking and harassment, Victor with conspiracy tied to old assaults. Sophia's team was still building a case to link Victor to Marcus's murder, but it was slow, the evidence buried in decades of silence. Ray threw himself into helping, digging through old files, chasing leads he'd abandoned years ago. It was his way of making peace with the past, and I let him, knowing he needed this as much as we needed closure. Caleb and I tried to find normal again. We went back to the bookstore, to late-night coffee runs, to stolen kisses under Seattle's endless gray skies. But something had shifted. We were stronger, yes, but also more aware of how fragile this life was. Caleb's murals took on a new urgency, each one a defiance of the hate that had tried to break us. I started writing again, pouring our story into pages that felt like a lifeline. One afternoon, we visited Ray at his small house in West Seattle. He'd invited us for lunch, a rare gesture from a man who usually kept his distance. The house smelled of garlic and rosemary, and Ray was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of chili like it was the most important task in the world. "Sit," he said, pointing to the table. We did, and for a while it was just us, three people bound by love and loss sharing a meal. Ray told us more about Marcus that day, stories he'd kept locked away. How Marcus had played the piano like he was pouring his soul into the keys. How they'd dreamed of leaving Seattle, starting over somewhere they could be free. We were naive, Ray said, a sad smile tugging at his lips. But you too, you're not. You're braver than we ever were. Caleb reached for my hand under the table, his fingers warm and steady. We learned from you, he said. From both of you. Ray's eyes glistened, and for the first time, I saw him as more than my uncle. He was a man who'd loved and lost, who'd carried that pain so we wouldn't have to. The trial came faster than we expected. Derek's hearing was first, a tense affair in a packed courtroom. He sat stone-faced, his scar stark under the fluorescent lights. Caleb and I testified, our voices steady despite the knot in my chest. We told the judge about the fear, the nights we'd spent looking over our shoulders, the mural that had almost cost us everything. The evidence was damning. Derek's journal, filled with rants about Ray, about us, about finishing what was started. He was sentenced to 5 years, with a restraining order to keep him away from us for life. Victor's case was Messier. He'd lawyered up, his defense claiming he was just a bystander, a man caught in the wrong place. But Sophia's team found a witness, an old bartender who'd worked at the bar where Marcus played. He swore he'd seen Victor arguing with Marcus hours before his death, heard threats about teaching him a lesson. It wasn't enough for a murder charge, not yet, but it was enough to keep Victor locked up while the investigation continued. Ray was there every day of the trial, his face a mask of determination. When it was over, he took us to the pier where he and Marcus used to walk. The water was gray, the air sharp with salt. This was our place, Ray said, his voice soft. I haven't been back since. He scattered a handful of ashes into the wind. Marcus's, kept all these years in a small urn. Rest now, he whispered, and I felt my throat tighten. Caleb and I moved forward together. We got a new apartment, a tiny place in Belltown with a view of the Sound. Caleb's murals started popping up all over the city, each one a love letter to resilience, to us. I finished my novel, a story about 2 boys who fought for their place in a world that didn't always want them. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. One night, we went back to the alley where it all went down. Caleb's mural was still there, untouched, the figure reaching for the star now a beacon for anyone who passed by. We stood in front of it, hand in hand, the city alive around us. This is our story, Caleb said, his voice steady. Not Derek's, not Victor's, ours. I nodded, my heart full. We'd faced the worst and come out stronger. Ray's past had shaped us, but it didn't define us. We were writing our own ending, one where love wasn't just a risk, it was a triumph. Months later, Sophia called with news. They'd found a new lead in Marcus's case, a witness who'd seen Victor and another man in the alley that night. It wasn't enough to convict, but it was enough to keep digging. Ray took it in stride, his focus now on living, not just surviving. He started volunteering at a local queer youth center, sharing his story, helping kids like me and Caleb find their way. As for us, we kept going. We fought, we laughed, we loved. We weren't naive enough to think the world was safe, but we were brave enough to live in it. And every time I kissed Caleb, every time I saw his smile or felt his hand in mine, I knew it was worth it. Uncle Ray had caught us that night in the bookstore, but what he'd given us, his truth, his fight, his love, was what kept us standing. The stars above Seattle shone brighter that night, and as Caleb and I walked home, I felt Marcus's presence, not as a ghost, but as a reminder. Love, real love, was worth every battle. We'd won this one, and we'd keep fighting for the next.